People heaven. All right, well anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here with you guys. I spent a little bit of last night at, we'll just call it the Other Convention. Ooh, yeah, that's right, I was there. And there were a bunch of those people who said, we'd love to come hear you tomorrow, but you know, we don't want to get in trouble for being involved with the Libertarians. Ooh, terrible. But I think a lot of what you guys do is thankless work. Sometimes it's unbelievable drudgery, and yet you just do it and do it and do it. You keep on doing it anyway, and it doesn't always bring immediate success. It just brings more drudgery and more work, and yet you just keep at it. And I deeply respect people who do that, so I'm very glad to be able to talk to you. So what I'm doing today is I'm giving 2 speeches. Now how can that be? How can this schmuck give 2 speeches? Well, I decided I want to give, first I want to start with, here's what I would say. Let's suppose what we all crave is that if only we could grab the whole country by the throat for just like a half hour. If we could just talk to people for a half an hour, what would we say to them that would leave them libertarians on the other side? That's what I want to do. But then I also thought, but I also want to talk to the libertarians. I don't want to talk to these imaginary non-libertarians for the whole speech. I also want to talk to the libertarians, so I'm going to give 2 speeches. So the first one is, what would I say to the whole world if I had their attention after they've gone through 12 years of government propaganda and they've been told the exact opposite of everything I'm going to say to them? What would I in fact say? And then secondly, what would I say to a bunch of libertarians if I just happened to have them in a room together? And guess what? Look, hey, here I am. So we're going to do both of those and then sort of tie it all up together. So we're going to zip right along. Now, everything I say will not be footnoted, given the time involved, and I have so much to try to cover, because I'm trying to convince people who have spent their entire, well, youth anyway, in an institution funded by the government whose job it is to make them into conformists. So it is tricky. I have a lot to say to these people. So I'm going to zip through it. So I would start, first of all, I find it that there's a certain irony in what happens at your high school graduation when you always get that speech about you got to follow your dreams. You can accomplish anything. But yet, the whole 12 years you've been in that school, they've been teaching you the exact opposite. You can't do anything. Only the government makes possible civilized life, and only the government makes it possible for you to survive and earn a living, and only the government makes it possible for you to work in decent conditions, and only the government makes the arts possible, only the government makes the sciences possible. Government, 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 government. But hey, you can do anything you want. What does that mean? Like, how do they have the nerve to give that speech? But anyway, they do. And so we are sort of, I don't know, propagandized into thinking that all the good things in the world come from some guy being in charge and telling everybody else what to do. People look to the example of the military, and they say, look at the military. The military gets stuff done. We got a guy in charge and people who obey. So this should be the model for all of society. This is the sense people have. That's why I think some people accepted the idea that central economic planning was a good idea. Because it seemed to them, wouldn't it be better and more efficient for there to be some guy barking out orders to everybody instead of everybody just doing whatever he wants? That sounds chaotic and disorderly. We can't have that. So, first I would tell people, there are miracles that go on every single day in this world that occur simply because individuals are acting. Like, think for example, there was nobody in charge of the English language. There was no one guy who said, okay everybody, I've decided. The word for this is tree. Everybody got that? It's going to be tree from now on. Like, that didn't happen. And so it's not even like, as my friend Bob Murphy puts it, it's not that dictionary companies invented English. It's not like dictionary companies just forced upon us the meanings of the words. The dictionary companies are merely codifying our already customary practice of designating this as a tree. So where does English come from? It comes from just spontaneous interaction of people. There is no czar or commissar or planner of the English language, and yet there it is. But you could imagine, you could just imagine people today thinking that there must have been some English language commissar who developed the language. Or how about take a scientific field like physics? Now physics has progressed tremendously over the centuries, and yet there is no guide There's no guy with a giant physics hat and he's wearing a lab coat. He's in charge of physics. There's nobody in charge of physics. They have physics journals, and the journals are supposed to weed out the bad articles, publish the good ones, and people build upon each other's work, and the result is this tremendous edifice of physics. And yet it develops with no guy doing it. No one even stops to marvel at this. But this contradicts this idea that you need some guy in charge. No, what's miraculous is how much we get done with nobody in charge. With just human beings interacting with each other like with other human beings. That's it. Where we interact with each other without some guy with a bullhorn. And it's astonishing what we can accomplish. Like, for example, I'm sure everybody in this room is at least familiar with that Leonard Read essay that Milton Friedman popularized, I, Pencil. So Milton Friedman holds up this pencil and he says, look, I got a freaking pencil over here. You look at the things in this pencil and you realize there's no person on earth who could produce this pencil. And you're skeptical of that. You think, oh, I know Joe works at the pencil factory. He could make a pencil. But when you think about it, it's actually quite difficult. The pencil begins with a tree. You've got to chop down the tree. What are you going to chop down the tree with? Well, you're going to need an axe, or you need a saw. What's the saw going to be made out of? It's going to be made out of steel. And for steel, you need iron ore. And then you need transportation to transport the steel from one place to another. Transportation requires gasoline, which requires oil refinery. All these different things that you would need to be an expert in and create a pencil, no human brain could possibly contain. So there are and that's not to mention the rubber for the eraser, the graphite, which comes from South America, all these different things coming together to produce an object that costs you a few cents. Now, could you imagine, before we had pencils, describing to people, all right, here's what we need to do. All right, first we got to go to this continent, then that continent. Then we got to get the graphite. We got to chop down the tree. We got to produce paint. Requires all these ingredients and all these processes. Then we got to shave down the wood to make it all nice and smooth. People would say, my gosh, this device is going to cost like $1 billion. And we're going to need some pencil commissar in charge of this thing. We would never produce a pencil. No one would even try. And yet this happens every single day, and nobody even notices it. Nobody even notices the miracle of this without any central direction, without that bullhorn guy. These miracles go on every day, and we are not ever taught to stop and appreciate them for a change. In fact, there was one time I had a sick child. She needed a vaporizer in the middle of the night. So in the middle of the night, I go to the store, I buy her a vaporizer for $10. And I actually, this is not a joke, I stood there in the store and I marveled at the fact that I just bought a vaporizer for my sick kid in the middle of the night for $10. And this is incredible. Think of all the things that had to come together to make this possible. And then I realized, wait a minute, I have a sick kid. I can't really be standing around here philosophizing. I gotta get out of here. But you know what we are taught to do, though, in school? We're not taught to appreciate markets or the price system that makes all this miraculous stuff possible. No, we're taught how a bill becomes a law. So right away, it prejudices people in favor of government activity. I know all about how a bill becomes a law, but I have absolutely no idea how a pencil could be possible. And I have so no idea about it that I don't even have the idea to ask myself the question. So these miracles take place every day. And in fact, on the free market, we have what the great Frederick Bastiat called economic harmonies. That on the market, we are all acting harmoniously in cooperation and concert together. That workers and businessmen have the same interests, not contrary interests, the same interests. The businessman wants low taxes on his business so that he can make more profits. But the worker also wants low taxes on that business, because the more profits that are earned, the more the businessman can invest those profits in capital equipment. That makes the worker more physically productive. That means more goods are produced, and when more goods are produced, vis-a-vis the amount of money in the economy, that makes your money worth more. The money stays roughly the same, the goods are increased. We all become wealthier through this process. The only thing government can contribute to that healthy process is stagnation and retrogression. That's it. All they can do is tax this wonderful process by which all of us working together improve our living conditions. But what does the state create? Does it create economic harmonies? No, the state can only create conflict. It gives a special privilege to one group that harms the other groups. That encourages the other groups to lobby for their own special privileges, which in turn harm everyone else. And it encourages a kind of low-intensity civil war of all against all. There's no economic harmonies there. Now, but they say that what I'm saying to you is too simplistic. They say that freedom yields you bad things. It yields you poverty, poor working conditions, and all the rest of it. All the things we learned in the 7th grade. The free market gives you all those things. But as I just explained, it's the market that curbs those things. Imagine in the 18th century, imagine the year 1700. Why are people poor in 1700? Is it because the rich people are wickedly depriving the poor of all the flat-screen TVs in the year 1700? Why is it? Why is it that in the year 1700, nobody protests against the existence of poverty? It's because in the year 1700, it never occurred to anyone that you could abolish poverty. It was assumed that the world you're going to be born into is a filthy world of squalor. You're going to live your life one bad harvest away from starvation, and then you're going to drop dead. No one figured you could get away with a life better than that. It's only when you get the market economy, it's so fantastic as a wealth creator that you realize, wait a minute, people don't have to live like savages anymore. It is possible to lift people out of this thing. Well, the reason people are poor in 1700 is they're doing most of their work by hand. Imagine if today we get rid of all the equipment we use to produce things. We produce everything by hand. We would produce like what, 1/300th of what we produce now, if even that? And there would be whole classes of goods we couldn't produce at all. Try to engage in coal mining with just your bare hands. Good luck. Try to engage in any type of mining or raw material extraction of any kind. Forget it. None of that stuff could even be done. So of course they're going to be poor. It's not that the rich have taken all the stuff from them. If you redistributed everything the rich person had in 1700 and gave it to everybody else would wind up with an extra 2 cents, and then that would be it. That rich person would move out of the country before this could be done to him again. That'd be it. Congratulations. The only way you can improve things is by letting the market function, let profits be reinvested, and build that machinery so that we become more productive. Goods become more abundant and their prices come down relative to wages. That is the only way we can become better off. I've talked about working conditions in a couple of my books. I won't dwell on that, but that is also something that the market makes possible. If we went over to Bangladesh today and said, you people have to work in terrible conditions, so today we're going to impose the U.S. Federal Register of Regulations upon the whole country, would that mean that the next day everyone would be working in a wonderful air-conditioned office building? No, it would mean the next day everybody's unemployed. No one could afford that in Bangladesh. So it can't possibly be quite that simple, and it is indeed the market that makes possible the wealth that allows us to work in better conditions. In fact, I just returned from Spain, so I hardly even know what time it is or what day it is or what country I'm in, but I was in Spain earlier this week. I gave a talk there. People were telling me that in Spain, it is so difficult to start a business. There is so much bureaucracy and so much red tape that only the very wealthy can afford to do it. Which is why you see gigantic businesses there. You don't see, even in this country with our curtailed freedoms, we still have some small entrepreneurs popping up. You just don't see that in Spain. You're either poor or you're super duper rich, because only the super duper rich can possibly navigate the regulatory thicket that the state has imposed. The state, by the way, which portrays itself as the great savior of the poor. Well, how about poverty around the world? Is that the fault of the free market? Is that the fault of you and me, of us being free? Well, in fact, this is the century, the 21st century and the 20th century combined. These are the centuries where we've started to see, after some years of third-way central planning, we start to see in the mid-20th century, but starting really in the 80s, a lot of liberalization of the good sort around the world. And what did we see? Poverty fell dramatically. Absolute poverty amounted to 85% of the world population in 1820. By